Hello and welcome to The Radical. I'm Christina.
And I'm Nicole. On our podcast, we delve into the roots of metaphysical wisdom.
That's right, Nicole. Our podcast is all about exploring those fundamental truths and practices that nourish your mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, Christina, we want to make metaphysical concepts easy to understand and accessible, especially for those who don't have a ton of time to do all the research.
Right? We'll do the research as well as share our experiences and perspectives, hoping to empower you, our listener, to find balance and magic in your day-to-day.
Inspired by the essence of the word radical, proceeding from the root, let's explore the roots of well-being and self-healing together.
This is The Radical with Christina and Nicole, two metaphysical girls in the material world.
Hello and welcome to the Radical Podcast. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Christina.
Today we're talking about Scorpio. No mud, no Lotus. We are going to jump right into the list, sort of the facts, information. In our second segment, we'll do a deeper dive. And then in our third segment, we have 3 messages from the universe using the Antique Anatomy Tarot. And this is by Claire Goodchild. Yeah, Christina hasn't seen this deck yet, and I'm really excited to show it to her.
Another new deck. I love it. We're learning so much about oracle decks and tarot, which is our intention. So this is fantastic. I can't wait. To start the list, the dates for Scorpio season and the tropical Western calendar are October 25th to November 22nd. In the Northern Hemisphere, this time of year is associated with death and descent into the underworld because it is the final time of harvest. So our agricultural communities, this was the end of the growing cycle. So that was the land was going to sleep. Samhain is on the 31st, which is of the final harvest festival. It's called High Autumn, and it corresponds directly with Halloween. This is the Sabbath of death and rebirth. It occurs at a time when the veil between the worlds is at its thinnest, allowing spirits to pass through. This is also considered the new year in the Wheel of the Year. Samhain was the division of the year between the lighter half and the darker half. Other dates important in Scorpio season are November 1st, which I researched this a little bit. I went down a rabbit hole and then I just summarized it. It's not a great summary. I would request that we do a whole podcast on the Day of the Dead, All Saints Day, because it is so much history, so much stuff about it. But November 1st is Day of the Dead, combines an ancient Aztec custom of celebrating ancestors with All Souls Day, which is the Catholic holiday. Which came first? I didn't dig that deep, but they are combined to take place on the same day. So we'll do more research on that and have some more answers on that. But Day of the Dead, All Saints Day, is on November 1st, which is another big commemorative day of ancestors. Also, on November 1st is the new moon in Scorpio. If you can't get enough woo-woo things in one day, the new moon in Scorpio will offer us an opportunity for deep introspection and shadow work. Embrace this lunar phase as a catalyst for personal growth and empowerment as we navigate through the depths of our shadows towards enlightenment. You know, just a regular Scorpio new moon. and the full moon in this time frame will be November 15th, which is a super beaver moon in Taurus.
Ooh, a super moon.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about everything moon related in our last episode. Wow, lots of powerful things coming our way.
Well, the title that we discussed for this episode for Scorpio is based on my relationship with Scorpio, which has to do with rebirth enlightenment and emergence. So it was no mud, no lotus. And that is going to keep weaving its way through almost everything that we kind of discussed. But more on that in the second half.
It's a theme.
Yes. Scorpio energy is to learn and let go. Deep transformation, explore the complexity of the human soul, spirit, life, death, the occult, which means the hidden. Scorpio energy is investigative, and the shadow side of to that is obsessive. A tendency to delve deep into everything.
I heard somebody say that they would hire Scorpio as their private investigator.
Yeah. I loved the term investigator because a lot of everything else was obsessive, digging too deep. Scorpio energy, we need to use this energy to help us embrace mystery and enigma, to be intense, to get deep to those inky, watery, emotional depths of ourselves, and a huge capacity for empathy. So this is a little quote, or a little bit I pulled off of my open source search. The power of Scorpio lies in the ability to enter the darkness and heal the split in your psyche, the wound at the heart of being human, that we're divine creatures having a human experience. It's the pain of being conscious. This is how you transmute darkness into healing. To do this, you need to be sensitive and intuitive, but also tough, like Scorpio, because Scorpio is strong. It is a water element, or the element is water for Scorpio, but there's a lot of fire in Scorpio. I don't know if you read that in your research as well. The quality is fixed, which means it's one of the stabilizers of the zodiac. Polarity is negative and yin. And we can use the phrase feminine not in a gender, but in an energy style. And planets, today, the ruling planet of Scorpio is Pluto. But before we knew about Pluto, older traditions assigned Mars to Scorpio. So you can see where some of that fire. You still might see Mars connected to Scorpio in a lot of ways. If you are interested, the exaltation is in Uranus, the fall is in the moon, and the detriment is in Venus. It's a lot of heavy heavy information about the planets. And that podcast is coming. The ruling house is the 8th house, which covers taboos, legacies, taxes, sex, intimacy, death, and rebirth. So just those things. I know so little about the houses, and I'm so excited to learn more. And Nicole and I have a plan to do to go down the rabbit hole of all the houses. So we will find out, and we'll share that information with you. But the 8th house is the house of transformation, intimacy, and unraveling the mysteries of life. Just that kind of stuff that, nothing too, it is very heavy. My sarcasm is coming out there because this is a terrifying house for me. Scorpio energy is terrifying to me.
Yeah, nothing casual here.
Yeah, nothing casual. I really even shouldn't be sarcastic about this. These are some heavy life topics. It can be linked to the themes of life and death, money and inheritance, legacy, merging of resources, connections, and how we face our fears. How's that? So there is a lot in the 8th house of our relationship with ourselves, but because it has to do with sex, intimacy, and legacy, it also pertains to how we engage with other people, intimate unions, psychology, and even finances, and how we navigate those connections. The glyph and the symbol are the same for Scorpio, and it looks like an M with an arrow-shaped tail, like its ancient ruler Mars, because it has an arrow, and it represents the Kundalini serpent energy. And then in Virgo, you remember that the arrow was pointed inwards, and then this one is pointed outwards, as in a burst of energy outwards and upwards. And like I said, the symbol that you might have on your smartphone is exactly the same as the glyph.
Did you know, Christina, that if you take a scorpion and put it under UV light, it glows like a bluish color?
I did. I was stationed. Yeah, I was stationed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and scorpions were there with us. Yeah,
Wow.
I thankfully only had one late night encounter where the scorpion was moving towards my heater, and it kind of went away. But they were very much a part of the desert experience for a lot of people.
Were you taught that they glow as a way
Yes. Yeah.
to see them?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. What kind of led me to this discovery was this notion of observing scorpions in nature give us a lot of information about Scorpio. And when you mentioned the arrow on that M
Mm-hmm.
symbol for Scorpio is pointing outward, the very first thing that I thought of was protection. Scorpio can be very protective, especially of itself, its feelings. Scorpios feel really deeply, so that outbound sting is
Yeah.
a self-preservation and protection thing. When we think about it in our behavior, like I'm a Scorpio rising, I really do see how I can react when I feel threatened. I think having the scorpion represent Scorpio sort of encapsulates that
Oh yeah.
need for protection and preservation.
The constellation is called Scorpius, and it's one of the most ancient and recognizable constellations in the night sky. The pattern of stars that create this constellation can easily be imagined as a scorpion because it has the loop where the tail, the the classic curve and arrow of that scorpion tail. The Babylonians called this constellation Mulgertab, and I apologize for my my pronunciations, but that literally translates into the creature with a burning sting, scorpion. The Western astrological sign Scorpio differs from the astronomical constellation because astronomically the sun is in Scorpius for just 6 days from November 23rd to November 28th. And the difference is because of Ophiuchus. Do you remember the 13th constellation that we talked about all the way back
Yes.
in Is Astrology Legitimate? But
Yes.
Ophiuchus isn't used in our tradition of astrology. So the sun is actually in Scorpius and Ophiuchus. The last thing I want to say about the stars in the Hawaiian tradition, Scorpius is the demigod Maui's fishhook. The colors for Scorpio: red, maroon, black. I like this. All the flowers were dark red flowers. What colors do you think of?
I came across kind of some golden hues come up with
Mm.
Scorpio. I usually associate golden colors with Leo, but I like it.
I like the golden colors because of where we live. The leaves start to change, and that
Yes.
specific gold. Oh, all those are like leaf colors too. Fall
Yeah.
colors. Yeah.
Actually,
Duh.
yes.
Hello. The day of the week is Tuesday because of Scorpio's association with Mars, and Tuesday is Mars Day, is the day dedicated to Mars, and it is a great day for getting things done. The number 9 is the number for Scorpio, which I feel like fits very well. The number 9 is revered in Hinduism and is considered a complete, perfect, and divine number because it represents the end of a cycle in the decimal system.
Hmm.
If you love math, you probably appreciate and revere the number 9 for all of its mathematical qualities. This decimal system originated from the Indian subcontinent as early as 3000 BC. The number 9 is the last of the single digit numbers, which are known as cardinal numbers in numerology, and has the highest value. It's a symbol of completion. It shows that you've lived and learned, You're engaged with living your life in a meaningful, conscious manner, and you're setting rewarding goals. And then the final note about 9 in numerology is that 9 is powerful. It does represent completion, although not a final ending, more like the fulfillment of one cycle so that you can prepare to initiate the next one. It's a recognition of life's ongoing ebb and flow, which is the theme of Scorpio. For me, transportation, rebirth,
And death.
and death.
It's also, Christina, our 9th podcast episode.
I didn't even notice that.
I almost told you before we hit record, and I was like, no, I'm going to wait and tell her
I didn't
while we're
even
recording.
notice that. Universe, we are listening. Oh my gosh. I didn't
I
even
know.
notice that.
We're so aligned.
Ooh. That and all this Scorpio energy all over us. Ooh, Scorpio energy makes me feel uncomfortable because I need to work on it. Let's just put that out there. The body parts associated with Scorpio are the genitals and reproductive organs, the bladder, and the large intestines. Did you come across anything else?
I sometimes see it described as an area of the body, so the hips and the pelvis, which contains everything Christina just said.
The chakra for Scorpio is the solar plexus, Manipura, a source associated with associated with personal power, self-confidence, and assertiveness. That's some Scorpio energy right there. It has 2 metals because of the shift from one planet to the other. So iron, classically known as the metal of Mars, is universally perceived as the symbol of human strength, fortitude, honor, courage, sharpness, tenacity, confidence, and power. So that's iron. And then also steel, which the energies of steel are highly protective. If you're looking to protect yourself from aggressive advances or any forms of extreme negativity, stainless steel is a good option. I did not know that.
I didn't either.
Okay, so the virtues of the Scorpio expression in the person, but also the expression of Scorpio energy in this time of year, is strong, determined, loyal, faithful, intuitive. They have the capacity for regeneration and are resolute, powerful, emotional, persuasive, cunning, and outsiders.
They cannot be fooled. I heard that many times in my research, and having a lot of Scorpio influence in my chart, I feel like I can say, yes, that is true. I think it's really hard. Even as a young child, it was really hard for my parents to fool me in a sense. I told you this story, Christina, while we were in Colorado last week, but when I was in middle school and my parents were taking my brother and I to pick out puppies for Christmas.
Yes.
What they did was took us out of school and said, well, we took you out of school early to go look at Christmas lights. So they weren't lying to us to be malicious. They wanted to preserve this surprise that we were getting puppies. And I had none of it. I picked that apart. I said, that doesn't make sense. Why are you taking us out early when there's daylight to go see Christmas lights? That to me is a Scorpio virtue, because there's a lot of perception with Scorpio energy.
The flaws of the Scorpio characteristics and energy: they are vindictive, controlling, ruthless, distrustful, jealous, temperamental, possessive, drastic, domineering, furious, manipulative, and vain. That's when you've got to balance out that energy. You've got to figure out what you need to do to come more into balance.
Scorpios can be too protective to the point where they are closed off rather than open-hearted. This can happen if Scorpios feel burned or betrayed, they put that wall up and start shutting people out as a protective mechanism. They can generate a lot of doubts in their mind. So that plays into what Christina said, being distrustful.
Mm-hmm.
It can show up as distrusting people, having a lot of doubts about people's motives around them, doubts about situations. Scorpio can also cause cracks in our willpower. I thought that was a really interesting
I like
flaw
that.
of Scorpio energy.
I'm going to remember that. Cracks in willpower. The tarot cards for associated with Scorpio, okay, the death card, 13, also called the transformation card and the mortality card. The death card, I always had mixed feelings about it because I knew I needed to do something every time I saw it. You know, you're just like, I know. Every time that card came up, it was like, you have got to let go if you want to change. You've got to cut those ties. If you want to truly transform, you've got to dig deep and you've got to make that decision to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, death is not the opposite of life. It is the energy of transmutation, the energy of transformation. Sometimes it can be swift change, brings new beginnings. It could be a fundamental change in your life. It could also be destruction, entropy, change and transition. My deck that I have, that if you have this card as a reverse or you really feel out of balance with it, the question to ask yourself is, how can I let go?
Yes.
Let go.
Yes.
I like to talk about the Hebrew tree of life correlation. So it's Nun or Nun, the fish, which means decline and rebirth. So that is also a very nice little snapshot of exactly what the death card, decline and rebirth.
What I mentioned earlier about look to nature to understand Scorpio. The trees, for example, this time of year, they're not dying, but there's that decline. They're shedding their leaves, they're letting go. And I love how you say this, Christina, their nature's going to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
That's not death. That's
Mm-hmm.
the energy of transmutation. That's nature doing what it needs to do to keep coming back, to keep being reborn every year. In one of my books, the death card, the reverse meaning is clinging.
Ooh.
And so imagine if nature did that. Imagine if nature was like, nope, I'm going to cling to these leaves and I'm going to, go against the natural forces. I mean,
I know.
it just, we can't do
You
that.
can't have a new leaf if the old leaf is hanging on. You cannot grow
Exactly.
a new leaf.
Exactly. So clinging, refusing to change, stubbornly resisting. The lesson with the reverse meaning for me with the death card in tarot is hanging on when you're meant to let go actually causes more pain and suffering.
Yes.
It's kind of counterintuitive, but if you cling when you need to release, you will experience greater pain and suffering than if you just let go and release from the onset. Because the death card is tied to Scorpio, there is that symbol or that meaning of transformation, but also protection.
Aww.
And because this card is tied through numerology to the Emperor card, the Emperor card gives us stability and structure. So to me, this card is speaking to trusting the protection inherent in the laws of death and rebirth, and knowing that there is a higher intelligence which provides stability and structure and protection as we evolve through changes and transformations. So it feels really scary to us, but there is that divine intelligence, that greater plan, which in and of itself is stable and gives us structure and protection.
Got to remember that. The death card wouldn't be there if it wasn't time. The universe isn't going to push you unless you're ready to do it, until you're ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's also 3 cards in the minor arcana. The 5 of cups, of course, cups, because that is water, which is emotion. 5 is generally the number of strife, and this is Mars and Scorpio. That's fire and water. You can imagine that this has some tricky meanings. My interpretation of this card is no one can save you but you. What you need is right in front of you if you choose to see it. And then grief, disappointment, loss, sadness, depression, regret. But the balance question for 5 of cups is, how can I fight for myself? Sometimes I see this card when I'm having mental health issues. And so I see that as, how can I fight for my mental health? Knowing that just as important as going to the dentist, you have got to fight for yourself and for your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
6 of cups, Sun in Scorpio, nothing is gone forever. Coming home to what you love. Gifts of the heart, childhood, nostalgia, memories. So the question to bring into balance, how can I practice acceptance? 7 of cups, which is Venus and Scorpio. The richest and most effective magic is always right in front of you.
Ooh.
Searching for purpose. And this is the one of choices, illusion, possibilities, fantasy, imagination, extremes, confusion, temptation. This is the one where the figure is daydreaming and sees all these things inside different cups. My favorite deck that I have right now, the Garden Witch, it depicts a witch in her garden, and all her cups are on her wall, and she's just kind of gazing up at them and seeing what she wants to plant and what she wants to grow, what she wants to cultivate. So the question is, how can I cultivate focus? Because there is such a thing that you can be lost in your head, and sometimes you've got to cultivate some focus. You have to make a choice. Those are the tarot cards. And that is the list.
Diving into segment 2, the descent into the underworld. This came up in our podcast on the Wheel of the Year. And if you trace and follow the metaphor of the god and goddess in your Wheel of the Year,
Which represents the yin and the yang energies of life, right?
yes, so many layers to this. But the god is making his descent at this exact time into the underworld. Scorpio energy is meant to stay watery or in flow or in flux. We're really meant to be in this deep emotional water during this time and embrace everything that comes with it. We're not trying to necessarily change it or make it something different. We're meant to really embrace what's coming up. And by accepting it for what it is, that's where the change comes. We're not like, oh, I don't like this. It needs to be something different. No, it needs to be exactly what it is. We need to work on our acceptance of it.
It's the imagery and the story of the lotus coming up through the mud.
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot not mention the myth of Hades and Persephone, who Hades is the masculine, he is the yang ruler of the underworld, and Persephone was the daughter of like this yin, earth goddess. So it's that same kind of thing. But she had to go into the underworld for 6 months. And that was when the season went from flowering to asleep. And I think that myth goes back into the Babylonian times as well, Pluto is the planet of Hades. And it's that time of year when it's like that 6 month split between light and dark,
which is also represented in the Wheel of the Year.
which is also represented in the Wheel of the Year, which is also the time of Day of the Dead, when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest, when this transition is happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating when it all comes together this way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's like I've been learning all of these pieces of information throughout my whole adult life, and I'm just now putting it all together in a package because I'm learning about the energies of the astrological year. You don't have to be a Scorpio to harness, feel, have in balance and out of balance Scorpio energy, because it's associated with the time of the year as well.
Right. Shadow work
Ugh.
is nearly synonymous with Scorpio, I would say.
Yes. Yes.
I'm not the biggest fan of the term shadow work.
I think it gets misused.
I think
And
it
I
does
think
too.
that we think it means something when you're talking to somebody else, but if somebody says shadow work, it's often best if you ask them what they mean by it. Right?
I would agree.
Wouldn't you agree? Like, actually get clarification. Yeah.
Yes. Some other names for shadow work may be inner work, ego work, emotional integration, the dark night of the soul. The shamans call it a soul retrieval. And if you're in therapy, you may have heard inner child work. In recovery communities, this is usually referred to as a moral inventory. So a lot of terms, and like Christina said, depending on the vantage point of the person you're talking to, this could mean so many different things.
And I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable with all of those things. And humor is my coping mechanism. Oh, humor and sarcasm are the two things that I'm like projecting out during this podcast.
Yeah, it's heavy work and it is uncomfortable work. The point of it is figuring out what is driving our behavior, what is driving our emotions, sort of getting into that murky sludge of our subconscious and figuring out what's going on and what kind of dictates and controls your behavior, your emotions. My favorite terminology, I think, is probably emotional integration, although I feel that this work goes beyond emotions. So I like the term integration. We have these different parts of ourselves. We have parts of ourselves that have been traumatized, for example, had to deal with heavy emotions, heavy experiences. The point of shadow work or integration is not pushing it away or wishing it away, but we want to welcome it. We want to accept it. I love the metaphor of welcoming the pieces of us back home. That's a really lovely metaphor. I've also heard it said, if you're experiencing a really intense emotion, invite it in, let it sit at your table, pour it some tea, and what would it tell you? And can you listen without banishing that emotion or that experience from your table? And that's when we start to alchemize and transmute and change on a really deep level. Emotions are energy. So when they come up and they're really intense, they're usually seeking something, whether that's to teach us something or they are looking to be accepted by us. So one way to think about it is when these things come up, what am I going to do? How am I going to direct this emotional energy? Am I going to shove it back into the shadows? Or will I try something different? Can I love and accept myself regardless of my experiences and my emotions? Can I welcome all the pieces of me home? If we don't do this work, what can start to happen are patterns of self-sabotage and our sort of automatic patterns and conditioning will take over despite our best intentions to change.
You have to go through the mud of your human existence. And trauma is any time you didn't have a choice. There's the capital T trauma, and then there's also little t trauma, and they both leave scars on our body and on our psyche. You don't have to quantify and you don't have to qualify your trauma for it to count, in quotation marks, as I'm saying that. Anytime you didn't have a choice causes
And I've also
trauma.
Yes, and I've also heard it said if you had an experience at any age where you felt too overwhelmed, too upset, it was so intense that you couldn't really process it at that moment, that also causes trauma, sort of that inability to fully let that emotion or experience like begin and end and pass through.
Yeah.
So Christina's exactly right. It's big T trauma, it's little t trauma. It is things, inner child work. What did we get conditioned into when we were growing up? What beliefs did the people around us have that we still carry with us, that may be subconsciously dictating the things that we do, the things that we say? And it's a lot.
Shadow work to me, after you explained it, the two ways I understand shadow work is inviting that thought to tea and sitting at the table with you, sitting as deep and as detailed as you can in that emotion or that memory. That's one way that I understand that. And the other is your positive characteristic, like your virtue, and then on the other side of that is the flaw. The balance between the two of those. The shadow side of your protectiveness is compulsiveness. Both of those need to be in balance. Those are my two, like, what I think shadow work is. But other people have different definitions of that. So like we said, ask before you enter a shadow work workshop or something like that if you're not 100% sure exactly what you're going to be doing. But that is what came to my mind is the No Mud, No Lotus. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist spiritual leader, writes in the book No Mud, No Lotus, it's the art of transforming suffering. Most people are afraid of suffering, but suffering is a kind of mud to help the lotus flower of happiness grow. There can be no lotus flower without the mud. The quote goes on to say, the lotus cannot be there without the mud. Likewise, happiness cannot be there without suffering. I don't want to believe that. But it's true, right? Going back to the quote, likewise, happiness cannot be there without suffering. Looking deeply into our suffering, we gain an understanding of it, which gives happiness a chance to blossom. Thus, the lotus does not have to reject the mud, and the beauty of the lotus actually gives value to the mud. That's transformation. That's that deep shadow work, that, like I said, that deep, inky, watery, cold places inside of us. We need to sit in those places and figure out what they are and why they're there, so that we can release the seed of the lotus can grow through it.
Right.
It's not wrong. It's not wrong to have that mud. That mud has to be there. We're human beings. We have mud inside of us. We're not trying to get rid of the mud. We're not trying to get rid of it, but you do need to sit with it so that the seed can come through it. All right. Whew. Shake that off.
I know. It's a lot.
I'm so thankful to have done this podcast to put all that together for myself. I have Scorpio in my birth chart in one place, the North Node. The
Fascinating.
North Node, I know, right? The North Node, and I wrote it down, is the qualities one is learning to embody in this life lessons. The North Node, as I've begun to understand it after Nicole and I have talked about it multiple times, is this is the tool, these are the characteristics to help me get to my life's purpose. Now, I don't know what that is yet, and I don't fully understand what that is yet, but for me to get to fulfill my karmic debt, to fulfill the purpose of my life, is finding a capacity to be emotionally aware and open, finding the capacity to engage in genuine intimacy, and following a self-directed path to my true passions, and displaying raw, stripped bare emotional honesty.
Mm.
So that's one interpretation of Scorpio North Node. There's a lot more out there. Those are the ones that I know scare me the most. Clearly, that is where I should be going.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I mean, there's other interpretations. As we all know, there's so much information on open source search. You search and read and find the information that works for you. But that's what stood out to me. And I know it to be correct for me because I'm terrified of it.
Yeah.
That's my life journey, right? But that's my life journey. And the Scorpio energy, those are my tools. Those are my tools to get there, is how I see it. That's what I'm moving towards.
Scorpio is my ascendant or rising sign. Scorpio risings tend to be very private because they feel very deeply and want to protect themselves. So similar to Christina's North Node, which is asking her to be vulnerable, display that emotional honesty. Same. My comfort zone is to be very private because I do have concerns and hesitations about opening up. The ascendant or the rising sign in our chart describes our vibe, the impression we make on other people, how we present ourselves, sort of our mask. As we get closer and closer to our podcast on the birth chart as a whole, the rising sign is considered one of the big three, along with the sun and the moon signs. And that's what the ascendant sort of symbolizes, is our vibe and the impression we make on other people. I have quite a bit of Scorpio,
I know,
in my chart.
I'm scrolling down. I'm like, ooh, look at all this. I'm sitting back with my tea. I'm just like, okay, Nicole, tell me.
I knew Scorpio was my rising sign, but I did not realize all these other placements as well. My Pluto is in Scorpio.
Isn't that called domicile?
Yes.
When it's in its home?
Yes.
Oh.
Because Pluto is Scorpio's ruling planet, so it's at home. We've talked about the outer planets before. Christina has mentioned this previously. Because Pluto is an outer planet, this placement speaks more so to a generation. So in my case, people who share Pluto and Scorpio with me are those born between, I've seen 1983 and 1984 to 1995. Pluto will next enter Scorpio in October of 2095.
What?
Pluto takes about 248 years to orbit around the sun. It's sort of an elliptical orbit, so the time spent in each sign varies for that reason, but anywhere from 12 to 31 years. People born in this generation with Pluto in Scorpio, we value transparency, authenticity, and we are the people that actually want to deal with the dirt that's swept under the rug. We're like, no, we're not ignoring that. Let's clean this up, bring it to light. And this applies on a personal level, but also on a collective level. There is a focus on emotional and societal shifts. People from this generation tend to question existing power structures and place value on truth, emotional depth, transformation. People with Pluto in Scorpio are very drawn to metaphysical type practices as a way to explore meaning, significance, and to investigate life's mysteries and enigmas. Because Scorpio rules the 8th house, I wanted to see what was in my 8th house, and my Chiron is in the 8th house. Chiron is called the wounded healer. Very Scorpio fitting, because Chiron is representative of both a source of pain, but also our healing. So Chiron very much is about basically facing that source of pain head on, and through that, finding the source of healing.
Wow. I don't have anything in the 8th house in my birth chart, and I haven't gotten to my Chiron yet. So, ooh, that is like, that fits perfectly.
It really does. So kind of touched on it already, but one of my healing journeys includes embracing vulnerability. So yay. Right.
Was that sarcasm?
It was sarcasm, Christina. Very good. I definitely
we are full on in our coping techniques right now.
Yeah. One of my coping techniques is to roll my eyes at things. So, when I hear, oh, you need to do some shadow work or inner child work, my gut reaction is kind of like that rolling of the eyes, like, like I know, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
Last but not least, Scorpio falls within my 12th house, and this is the house of the unconscious, the hidden, the mystical, kind of the occult, like we mentioned again at the beginning. So just the layers here, how everything's kind of woven together, the shared themes, the overlapping topics here of healing and getting acquainted with our pain.
And also resilience. Absolute resilience. The image of the Lotus coming up through that mud is Scorpio. That is how I see this, is that transformation. That yes, it hurts. Yes, it's work. Yes, I don't want to do it, but we can. We're strong enough. We have help. We've got that Scorpio energy to do it.
Yes.
And it's going to give us the strength we need.
The strength and the protection. Yes. Well, just to keep all the Scorpio goodness going, we will pull our 3 cards.
Okay.
And again, I am using the Antique Anatomy Tarot. This is by Claire Goodchild. I could not believe the 3 cards that jumped out. I saged these cards, I shuffled them, but Scorpio energy was like, I am coming through, get ready. Our first card is the Judgment card from the Major Arcana. This is card number 20. Its astrological association is Pluto. Themes of rebirth in the underworld.
Big time. I mean, on the classic deck, this is the bodies coming out of the ground, right? Heeding the trumpet call. I mean, that's some literal rebirth energy.
Yes. Elements are fire and water.
Ooh.
So we're getting a lot of these, what we've already talked about in relationship to Scorpio and Pluto and the elements. Oh, so much is just coming through in this card. And we will post pictures, and we can always cut this part out too if we want to. But can you see it, Christina?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I can't wait to see the pictures of those. Oh my gosh.
It
I
is
want to see that deck.
Yeah, this is an awesome deck. It is a skeleton looking like he's coming to life. He's coming out of a coffin, and there's these beautiful purple flowers growing around the coffin. The past is calling, and it won't stop until you acknowledge it. The Judgment card is all about acceptance and forgiveness. When you understand that some things cannot be changed, you can finally move on to bigger and better things. This card wants you to stop wearing masks and to be your authentic and imperfect self. What makes you great is your resilience in the face of your toughest trials, and your battle scars contain the map to your future. Rebirth is the process of reflecting on your choices and understanding how they led you to where you are now. You are about to be resurrected into the next version of yourself.
About that.
The second card is Page of Elixirs. In this deck, the elixirs are the cups. So we got the element of water. As a person, the sensitive, intuitive Page of Elixirs is there for you when you need her most. If you need a shoulder to cry on, she will be there to listen and offer advice. Being so open, sometimes this page gets burned by people who don't understand her compassionate nature. As a situation, the Page of Elixirs asks that you take a moment to listen to others and really try to understand their point of view. But don't ignore your gut feelings if something seems off. Friendships and relationships are extra important to you right now and should be nurtured with tenderness. And our very last card is the Two of Elixirs, staying with the watery cup element.
Right?
This card represents two people uniting in love and compassion. The union is balanced and fair, and together they can reach new heights. While often signifying romantic soulmates, the Two of Elixirs can also represent a close friendship or beneficial business partnership. If you have been involved in a conflict or argument with a loved one, this card advises that all will be forgiven soon, as long as you approach each other with kindness and patience.
Beautiful. I cannot wait to see the picture of those cards. They look gorgeous.
And they're perfect for Scorpio and this season.
Samhain. The ancestral, old-timey calling back to our past. I love that.
So those were the 3 messages from the universe and our podcast on Scorpio. No mud, no lotus.
Thank you for hanging in there with us as we delved through this and dealing with our coping mechanisms. Thank you for listening, everybody.
And we'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Radical. The Radical is written and produced by Nicole and Christina.
Listener questions can be emailed to us at theradicalpodnc@gmail.com.
Our Instagram is theradicalpod.
Music by Van Horton. His Instagram is Van Horton Music.